a young man who I have a great relationship with for years, of tremendous respect. I never saw respect in his eyes ever again from that moment. It just shut down our relationship. I was not part of the grid. I was not part of the matrix. Medicine has actually been sculpted since the Rockefellers took over in the early 1900s to progressively make it a hyper-conformist environment. After a while, I started to say to people, do you realize this is COVID theater? We're maintaining a deception of the public here. The safe place is to do the same thing as everyone else. And it turns out Big Pharma's telling you what to do. As long as you do that, doesn't matter how many people die, no problem. But if you do something different, even if you save a life, now you've stuck your neck out. So that's the political background before COVID even started. I realize, without any question, that the entire population is being corralled into a poisoning of the most nefarious type.
We're so happy to have Dr. Mark Trozzi from Canada. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us, for joining KLA. We welcome you.
That's a pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
Could you start with just a brief bio, a brief introduction about yourself?
Oh, certainly. So I'm Canadian and from the province of Ontario. I graduated medical school, University of Western Ontario in 1990. And from there, I have 27 years experience in emergency medicine. I've taught medical school at 3 universities in Canada. The last decade before COVID, I mostly taught trauma medicine and critical resuscitation. Taught doctors from across the country and around the world. And I'm a nature lover. And and my career up until the launch of COVID, I tend to work in situations where you really only have one doctor for all emergencies. So I did like rural emergency, which would mean that whatever happened within 100 miles, whether it was a car accident or someone, unstable, thinking about killing themselves, or a woman in birth, or a gunshot, or a kid with a broken arm or a leg, I did all that. So a really excellent career. I love my career. I had a fabulous record. I've never been fired from a job before COVID. I've never, my record with the medical college was really great. And then came COVID. And so when COVID came, everyone can remember where they were. I was essentially sitting in an empty emergency department while people were being told on the news that the emergency departments were full. So that was a bit odd right off the get-go. And then, so in an emergency department was empty and preparing for, we were told, a novel coronavirus. So naturally, I researched because I thought, well, when these people get here, I'm going to be ready because I'm going to study this coronavirus business and know how to treat it. And it didn't take long to know that there were treatments like hydroxychloroquine and zinc. And of course, the standard treatment, all pneumonia, no matter what it starts with, a virus, a toxin, whatever, any pneumonia that actually progresses to pneumonia, you must treat with antibiotics or people die. So that was a very strange thing because we were told...
Are we talking like around January 2020 here?
Well, no, we're talking like March. So March, okay. April. So now, yep. COVID's going on. The televisions everywhere in the world are doing these PCR tests, which I also would study and learn were being abused dramatically to falsely represent cases and mortality. So yeah, at that time I'm researching. The hospital's empty. I mean, imagine I've worked for 27 years in emergency and I've had quiet days compared to super busy days, but I've never in my career had an empty hospital with nobody there. And I worked entire 14-hour shifts without a single patient. While the news was saying the hospitals are full, the doctors are risking their lives. There were people standing across the street holding signs, "We love you, doctors." And I'm inside saying, after a while, I started to say to people, do you realize this is COVID theater? We're maintaining a deception of the public here. And then you saw the suppression of treatment. So I would study treatments. People would talk about no antibiotics. I said, well, that's insane. We've been treating pneumonia for 100 years. Any pneumonia, if it actually is pneumonia, not just somebody saying pneumonia, but someone who knows how to diagnose pneumonia, you give antibiotics. We're told no antibiotics. And then, so 2020 was a year where I did a lot of research and I learned a lot.
Briefly, doctor, what was the reaction of your colleagues, nurses and doctors and administration at your hospital when you were early on pointing out that the emperor had no clothes?
Well, progressively becoming marginalized and alienated and literally having people, for instance, I'll think of 2 in particular. One was a young nurse and she'd worked with me for several years. And I'm good at emergency medicine. I had a very good reputation with the public. I mean, patients were very happy with my care. And working with me, I think, was interesting because we did great work. If you wanted to see people get helped, no matter what they came in with, work with me. We're into that. So this young nurse who had a very respectful relationship with me, and I mean, at this point, I'm 55 years old when COVID is launched. So I'm a
Mhm.
senior doctor, and here's a junior nurse. And when they came through talking about giving the injections, which of course I was studying those too before anybody got injected. I knew it was a genetic experiment at best and by no means a vaccine because of the ingredients. I mean, this is
Mhm.
hard science, not debatable. And I'd been telling my staff, hey guys, this supposed vaccine, I mean, I'm reading the emergency use authorization documents. This is by no means a safe thing, nor is it necessary. All the science is wrong. And when the admin team came through, this young nurse was sitting there and they were talking about, oh yeah, next week we're going to be the first to get the shots and everything. And I looked at her because she heard me talk and I said, you aren't actually thinking about getting that, are you? After everything I've told you? And now imagine, this is how deep the psyop goes. This is how deep mind control works. She looked at me. She'd been working with me for 4 years, seen me like save lives. And she says, are you really a doctor? Okay.
Oh man.
And there were other examples of that. There was a young paramedic who worked with me. And I think he was a great guy and he was a very good paramedic. You got to remember, everybody got screwed over mentally in COVID. Some of us
Yes.
resisted better than others. And that's just normal psychological demographics that some people are resistant to mind control. It doesn't make us
Yes.
superior. It's just reality. This paramedic used to talk to me like with too much respect, in my opinion. He thought I was so amazing. Right. And it was kind of fun, to have a younger colleague, 20 years younger, who's like, you're amazing what you can do and what you know and all this. So it was a very warm relationship, to say the least. Tons of respect from him and me. I actually think he was a great paramedic and he was a favorite of mine. A few months into COVID, he came in the hospital and him and I were standing together in the hall while some other things were going on around us. And I said to him, I won't say his name, but God bless him. I said, none of this makes sense. And he looked at me and he said, are you giving me some kind of conspiracy theory? And I said, maybe. And I'll kid you not, a young man who I have a great relationship with for years of tremendous respect. I never saw respect in his eyes ever again from that moment. It just shut down our relationship. I was not part of the grid. I was not part of the matrix. So that's what was happening to my colleagues. And you see, they were kept very busy. Right? When you want to
Yeah.
mentally control people, you keep busy. So you come out with things like, oh, it looks like 6 feet. It may be airborne. It might be 5 feet. Okay, we should mask at all times. No, double mask. So keeping people busy with all this BS and in panic. Because remember, imagine you're a doctor going, oh my God, anytime someone's going to come in here with this virus that's unlike any virus ever, and I'm probably going to die like the characters on, the show X, right? X Factor.
Yeah.
And or sorry, the X Files. And so these doctors were kept in fear. And then the other side of it was that there was a big carrot, because think of it, everybody likes a slack day at work, right?
Yes.
So, and true, if I came into work one morning and it was like, wow, there's no ambulances pending and there's 2 stable patients, I can actually have a coffee and have a chat with my friend before we start working. That's a rare event, right?
Yes.
Um, but suddenly you come to work and you don't have to do anything, nothing. Like you saw it while I was researching around the clock. There were some famous people that made these dance videos, highly choreographed dance videos. I mean, maybe they were sending a message, guys, there's nobody here, right? But the people were kept very busy. There was enough fear to say, like, don't go against this, right? And medicine is a bit hierarchical. Like even myself, I'm an emergency doctor. If you come into
Mhm.
a hospital, in the way I worked, whatever is wrong with you, I'm the guy. I'm going to take care of you. But
Mhm.
if, let's say, you have a rare infectious disease and I end up getting on a phone to a hospital far away and speaking with an infectious disease specialist about your case, I'm
Yes.
probably going to follow his advice. So if he says, Mark, oh, you know what, there's an unusual, version of staph that could be problem in this person, give him this slightly different ceftriaxone or whatever. Okay. So we're used to that. So the idea was presented that this infection was different than anything ever, that the super duper experts at the WHO were orchestrating everything. And don't be an idiot and start thinking you know what you're doing. Follow the directions, stay busy following the directions. And by the way, you don't have to do any work, and there's bonus money for everything to do with COVID. And at some point near the end of this, you're going to have the most lucrative injection campaign you've ever seen in your life, but you're going to have to take it, but you're going to have to believe in it. So, I mean, they were manipulated in every way.
Yes. So the incentive to keep your mouth shut and go along with the program was huge. One thing that this reminds me of is your most recent video where it's a panel discussion. And one of the early questions, the doctor who answered said, when we were told, I don't know if he used we, but he says, when doctors were told that this vaccine, and we'll get into the vaccine dangers later, but I want to mention this. When we were told that this is safe and effective, we, quote, believed it. And I thought to myself, well, I did an interview with, John O'Looney, the Undertaker, who notices all the strands in the blood. And he said, they know what they're doing. He says, no, I've talked to nurses who know something's going on, but like you say, there's an incentive to not do anything. They don't want to lose their job, blah, blah, blah. I mean, a doctor with payments and so forth. So it's somewhere in the middle, isn't it? To what extent did the doctors like you say, yeah, I know something's going on, but look, don't bother me?
Well, I'm one far end of the spectrum on this thing, just to be honest. Yeah. Okay. So for instance, I did what I had to do in terms of like, I had to wear one of those barriers on my face when I walked in the hospital. I didn't like it. And I knew it was counterproductive within a few weeks, but okay, I went along with that. Okay. Mm-hmm. I would try to, if there was a rare possible COVID case, and believe me, they were actually rare where I was, I could send the family off with a prescription for something that would actually help, but it was a dangerous thing to do. But luckily there were very few, so that didn't really crop up very much. Mm-hmm. So, whatever profession people are, there's a percentage of people that question things more, and there's a percentage of people who are conformists. Medicine has actually been sculpted since the Rockefellers took over in the early 1900s to progressively make it a hyper-conformist environment where the safe place is to do the same thing as everyone else. And it turns out Big Pharma's telling you what to do. And as long as you do that, it doesn't matter how many people die, no problem. But if you do something different, even if you save a life, now you've stuck your neck out. So that's the political background before COVID even started, right?
And I would assume that sort of environment begins in med school.
Oh yeah, and it's worse now than, like, I was teaching medical school when this started, and it's way worse now. The agenda, the WHO agenda, the whole psychological globalist agenda is deeper in med school now than it was when I graduated decades ago. Much more, but it was there then too. It's been a progression. When you're herding cattle, you herd them progressively.
Yes.
So in my case, as the pandemic or the plandemic or the spectacle continued, I was learning real science, and that's partly my grace is the type of career I had. I always worked as a lone doctor in an emergency department, remote. So I was used to not paying that much attention to geopolitical stuff. I was used to thinking and studying and always trying to ground what I'm doing in science and of course ethics. So by the time here's the thing, I wanted to know about this vaccine before anybody got it, like anything else. It's like, wait, we're thinking about giving a supposed suddenly made out of the blue vaccine for a disease that we're being lied about and manipulated about with a PCR test that's a scam, the way it's being used, etc. Blocked treatments, falsified deaths, all this, so that's the environment. I'm like, I want to know about this thing as soon as possible. So the soonest thing I could get that was solid was I got the emergency use authorization applications of Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca as they submitted to the FDA and other agencies. So I read them, right? But now here's the fascinating thing. The first thing I read, being a typical practical person, I think, is the ingredients. I mean, what's the first thing you want to know about a thing? Well, what's in it? So most of them had it on page 11 or page 12, ingredients. This is what was so obvious immediately at that moment. I didn't need to go down the hall and check anything. I did learn a lot more about it for sure, but it was not a vaccine. A vaccine is a few hundred or a few thousand particles of the thing you're vaccinating against. Like that's why I say, an attenuated virus. So you give people a couple hundred, a couple thousand damaged, modified, weakened, fragmented viruses that you're trying to vaccinate against. Now, it's a questionable science in and of itself. However, This thing was pegylated lipid nanoparticles containing modified messenger RNA. That's genetic stuff. And
that's a mouthful.
Yeah, and within an hour, what you could say is, they've come up with a well-founded. Pegylated nanoparticles were used in the past as experiments on like brain cancers because you could deliver anything you put in a pegylated lipid nanoparticle will go everywhere in the body. Nothing stops.
What is pegylated, Gene?
So they take a lipid nanoparticle is like a bubble of fat, right? Fat
Mhm.
molecules. And polyethylene glycol, like people are used to ethylene glycol, that's your antifreeze ingredient. Polyethylene glycol is a polymer where they take ethylene glycol and they string it together into chains. So these lipid nanoparticles that have the genetic payload in them, these tiny particles are little bubbles of fat. And on the outer surface of the fat, there's all these little tails of polyethylene glycol. What that does is that stabilizes this little particle. And this particle just goes through membranes like a ghost goes through a wall. So what that means is, like, if you inject somebody with genetic material, the body's going to destroy it pretty much, right? But if you inject it inside a pegylated lipid nanoparticle, it's going to go everywhere in their body, every cell, nothing, like no tissue is blocked.
In through the blood-brain barrier.
Through the blood-brain barrier, through the placenta barrier, through the unborn child's blood-brain barrier, into an unborn baby's ovaries, everywhere. Like you inject this, it goes everywhere. There's no barrier in the body that stops it. And not only does it go to all the organs and tissues, it literally, the bubble merges with cell membranes and just births into the cell the payload, which was highly modified messenger RNA to cause human cells to make the most toxic part of their coronavirus that was designed, which is the spike protein. So you literally, like, even on the surface, it's worse than that because we've analyzed the ingredients. We've found DNA and all kinds of other garbage in there, but that stuff's there. So literally, based on the ingredients, you're going to actually genetically modify tissues through all the human's body. So they themselves manufacture a foreign toxic protein. Not only is it a toxin, but therefore, they're going to be identified as foreign cells by the immune system, and the immune system is going to attack them. Exactly what we've seen. You didn't need to run the experiment. This was 100% predictable. And the fact that an emergency doctor who understands basic good biological science could spend a little time looking at their own paperwork and realize what I'm saying to you, believe me, they knew it. There's no way that this was ever meant to solve anything by the people that understood what it was. And that's why, we're at a point now where I have to agree with people like Dr. Sansone. And, let's be honest, knowing everything we know now, this is a biological weapon. This is not a vaccine. It's a biological
Yes.
weapon.
Yes. And you say that you didn't even need to have the experiments, but you've done them. You've put together almost 1,000 studies on the effects of the COVID-19 vaccination, according to my knowledge. And what did you learn from those studies? What was the main takeaway?
So I've published. I've been informing the public from the beginning. So I've published written articles. I've been one of the authors in some of the actual research, the published papers. But before we go there, I just want to say that evidence at that point in the story. So imagine it's about October 2020. The jabs are going to be rolled out by the end of the year. I'm reading these ingredients, learning what I'm just telling you right now. And I realize without any question that the entire population is being corralled into a poisoning of the most nefarious type. So I literally resigned. I sold my house because I knew they were going to financially torture any doctor that came out against the thing. So I sold my house, eliminated my debts, downsized my family's existence to much lighter financially, because what did I really need? I needed a computer. I needed a small team, and I needed to get to work and warn the public and research. And so before anyone got a shot, I committed everything. I resigned all my jobs. I told the medical college I was taking a leave of absence on a sabbatical to do human rights work for an unextended period. Now, they would still attack me later, even though I set down my entire income to warn the world, right? Which is, of course, necessary under a situation like that. Like, you have to know, and this is, again, people being mentally controlled. You have to know when to remember the basic premise that you cannot serve what is right. You cannot serve God. You cannot serve love. You cannot serve honor and truth if you're a slave to money. And that was the test for doctors. And unfortunately, as you know, humans are very prone to being slaves to money and, of course, being mentally manipulated. So what did we learn after that? So first we learned that, that really was in there. We would learn that depending on how well they manufacture it, like the German working group was one of our first breakthroughs chemically on this thing. And the
Mm-hmm.
German working group was like 100 scientists. They reported to us at the World Council for Health. We got the message out to the world. The scientists, except for one, just there was like many of them, but they were like, we don't want to stick our head up because, they lock scientists up all over Europe and all around the world for revealing this stuff. So some of the things we found out then, one interesting one was the better it was manufactured, which meant actually the more even those little polyethylene glycol chains were. In other words, the more stable those little delivery nanoparticles were, the more likely people were to die from those lots. So what it meant is the better the thing was made, the more deadly it was. That's one interesting thing. And we found tons of contaminants. There was a bunch of atoms. You're just like, what on earth is like that atom doing there? That's not part of any of the molecules. So with this spectroscopy, X-ray spectroscopy and various methods. So that was kind of a first layer of discovery. Then you go forward. Of course, on the sideline, there's the whole, like, what are the little self-assembling things? I mean, that's a science that I'm not as expert in, but we'll just set that aside for now. The next biggest revelation was Kevin McKernan, the geneticist, who got some of the mRNA samples, and he's in a totally different industry of genetics. But I mean, this guy's very qualified. He's one of the authors of the human genome. And I don't mean God, I mean one of the guys that did the Human Genome Project.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, he got some of the vials and he analyzed them using genetic analytical equipment and at a very high tech level. I mean, this guy's got the lab to do it. And he said, oh, wait a minute, about a third of this genetic material is not RNA, it's DNA. And then he started looking at it. Oh, it's plasmid DNA, which is a kind of like infectious DNA particle that's used between bacteria. And then he dove into, well, what's it doing there? And here's what the companies did. First of all, nobody should have took this thing, even if it was made perfect. Like, I mean, this thing was never a good idea. Okay. But
Because of the experimental nature of it?
well, yeah, I mean, and it's not that experimental. You trigger human cells to make a toxic foreign protein. Do you need to run the experiment for a disease that we have cures for, that we're being oppressed and that we're being lied to about the mortality rate that was actually like 0 in children, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't run those kind of crazy experiments, and that wouldn't be the way to do it for sure. I mean, we've never done a vaccine that was a genetic thing. I mean, there's a whole business side to why that's such an attractive business for psychopaths.
Yes.
But when Pfizer and Moderna submitted samples to the regulators, they made them using PCR replication technology, which means they made a pure product. Now, still a terrible product. Nobody should have took it. A bullet's a bullet, but that's what they submitted. And then after they were approved, then they went back to the governments and said, oh, hey, listen, we're going to make it another way. Like, we've got another manufacturing process. It's going to be the same thing. And the governments were like, oh, okay. I mean, the governments, it seems illegitimate to call them this after everything they've done. But anyways, the regulators, these old school regulators said, okay, just give us the recipe. So the recipe involved, instead of directly manufacturing a cleanish version of this RNA, they would use E. coli bacteria, like the kind that you test stool samples for and stuff. I mean, it's commonly used. They would genetically insert stuff into it so it would make the genetic material in a DNA form. And then they would take that DNA form out of these vats full of bacteria and use that DNA to imprint and make the RNA. And then they would put in an enzyme and scrub out all the DNA, and it would just be pure RNA. That's what they told the governments. Now, there's 2 layers to this fraud. And the governments were like, perfect. No need to test it. Imagine, inject it into every one of the billion people on the planet that we can help you force to inject it into, but we're not going to test it. We're going to accept the stuff you already handed in, which again was a Frankenstein experiment in and of itself. And then you have, Kevin McKernan, then you end up with Dr. David Speaker and others replicate this experiment a lot. And it's like, yeah, DNA, plasmid DNA, and they start to map it. And there's not just the genetic sequence for the spike protein. There's genetic sequences most notoriously in there. There's a bunch. But the worst ones are derived. They're not the simian virus. They're derived from the simian virus. And they are gene hacking tools known from research since the 1990s. That if you inject foreign DNA into a mammal cell and you get it inside the cell like a nanoparticle will, and if you include these little promoter enhancer sequences, they will facilitate that DNA being moved into the nucleus and integrated permanently into the genetic structure of that cell. It's called genetically modifying the cell at the chromosome level. So that's the technology that's there.
And they've known this for 60 years.
So the ability to use those promoter enhancer sequences in genetic experiments goes back to the 90s. But we've known this since April of 2023 or so, maybe February, when Kevin McKernan exposed it, and we immediately got the message to the world, and other scientists repeated it. And when we've brought it to, multiple of us have brought it to supposed government's attentions, and they're like, it's okay. Now, this is where the fraud gets worse, and it's Pfizer. Because those SV40 and promoter enhancer sequences, okay, they're only in the Pfizer. They're not in the Moderna. I still wouldn't take a Moderna, but they're only in the Pfizer shots. And when they had to hand in the recipe, remember, government said, just give us the recipe and we'll believe you. So they hand in their second manufacturing process using E. coli bacteria and plasmid DNA. And there's a map. It's called plasmid map. And they have to include in their recipe the plasmid DNA that they use to create the process. And there's a bunch of genetic sequences in there, and there's an explanation for all of them in this Frankenstein stuff. But they did not include the SV40 promoter enhancer sequences. Now, there's only one way that that's not there. They scrubbed it from their maps and handed in fraudulent maps to the governments, covering up the evidence. Now, here's the saddest thing about that. When we pointed that out to the governments, I mean, myself, by this point in the story, the medical colleges are going to take my license, drive me into bankruptcy, God knows what. And I said, hey, guys, you could have never predicted this. You could have never predicted that Pfizer even would commit fraud and put gene hacking tools in the shot. So no matter where you stood on this till now, if somehow you thought this shot was a good idea, at this point, you must be awake that fraud's been committed. And you know what these old world governments did? These hostaged agencies, they went, no problem. It's not a problem. There's nothing to see here. So that's a bit about those shots. They didn't just advertise the shots and this whole agenda. They forced it down the world's throats, under this false state of emergency. You have a foreign entity, which I would argue is a hostile foreign entity. You have multiple hostile foreign entities, including the UN and including the WEF, running things. In the first 4 people I saw that day, I saw 6 major adverse events. People need to realize, these people are serious about killing us. Not just me, yes. All of us. They literally suspend my license the first afternoon that I'm there. So I literally got to see a morning worth of patients. They embarked on a massive propaganda campaign, and they said, we're going to bail out the media. Out of the blue, we're going to bail out the media. And literally they started dishing millions and millions of dollars to all these media outlets and turned them into propaganda machines.